Alrighty, this is Dr. Bev Knox, your psychology exam study buddy. I'm here to review the theory of memory, encoding, and studying. I'm here to help you pass your psychology exam with an A. Yes, I am. Today's topic is all about memory and encoded memory and how we retrieve the information put into our long-term memory. Alrighty, so let's get started. The definition of memory is the persistence of learning over time through the encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. Memory is learning that persists over time. It is information that has been acquired and stored and can be retrieved. Memory is the persistence of learning when? Over time. That's right. Through what? Encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. Okay, so how do we measure retention? To a psychologist, evidence that learning persists includes these three measures of retention: recall, recognition, and relearning. Recall is retrieving information that is not currently in your conscious awareness, but that was learned at an earlier time. Okay? Let's see. So recall is a measure of memory in which the person must retrieve information learned earlier, as on a fill-in-the-blank test. What is recall? Recall is retrieving information that is not currently in your conscious awareness, but that was learned when? That's right, at an earlier time. And an example would be, very good, a fill-in-the-blank question test. That's right. Okay, recognition is identifying items previously learned. A multiple choice question tests your recognition. So recognition basically is a measure of memory in which the person identifies items previously learned. Recognition is a measure of memory in which the person identifies items previously learned, as on a multiple choice test. Now, relearning is simply learning something new. And by the way, learning something more quickly when you learned it a second or later time. Okay? So relearning is learning something more quickly when you have learned it a second or later time. Okay? So relearning is a measure of memory that assesses the amount of time saved when learning material again. What is relearning? Learning something more quickly when you learn it a second or later time. That's right. When you study for a final exam or engage a language used in early childhood, you will relearn the material more easily than you did initially. So that is relearning. Don't forget, learning persists includes 3 measures of retention. What are they? Recall, recognition, and relearning. And recall is a measure of memory in which the person must retrieve information learned earlier. Recognition is a measure of memory in which the person identifies items previously learned. And relearning is a measure of memory that assesses and the amount of time saved when learning material again. Okay, so to remember any event, we must do the following. We must get information into our brain, which is a process called encoding. Then retain that information, which is called storage. And later get the information back out, which is a process called retrieval. So let's go over these definitions, okay? And we'll start off with encoding. Encoding is the process of getting information into the memory system. For example, by extracting meaning. So encoding is the process of getting information into the memory system. Getting information into our brain. It's a process called encoding. What is encoding? The process of getting information into the memory system. Encoding is the process of getting information into the memory system. Okay, and storage is the process of retaining encoded information over time. Storage is the process of retaining encoded information over time. So encoding is getting the information into our brain, and storage is retaining that information. Now, retrieval is the process of getting information out of memory storage. Retrieval is getting information out of memory storage. So after we've encoded the information by getting the information into our brain, and we retained that information, which is a process called storing, later we get the information back out in a process called retrieval. Very good. You're doing so good. Okay, let's move on to a term called parallel processing. By the way, all these definitions I'm going over right now is so important for you to know for your psychology exam, and definitely these definitions are on my exams, okay? So parallel processing is processing many aspects of a problem simultaneously. The brain's natural mode of information processing for many functions. So, like most computers, and we know that computer processes information, right? Our brain is somewhat like that. Let's use that analogy for a minute. Our brain processes many things simultaneously. For some of them, unconsciously, by means of parallel processing. To focus on this multi-track processing, one information processing model called connectivism views memories as products of interconnected neural networks. Okay? Specific memories arise from particular activation patterns within these networks. Every time you learn something new, your brain's neural connections change, forming and strengthening pathways that allow you to interact with and learn from your consistently changing environment. So, to explain our memory forming process, there's a three-stage model that was proposed by Atkinson and Schifrin, okay? So there's a three-stage model for that. We first record to be remembered information as a fleeting sensory memory. By the way, I've got a learning video lecture that uses great illustrations and explain the process, the whole memory and studying and encoding memories. So great. I will put a link into this description down below for that video lecture, okay? But for now, this is for you to retain. I'm going over this information over and over and over for you to retain that information in your long-term memory. So we just spoke about what parallel processing is, right? Which is processing many aspects of a problem simultaneously. Now, to explain how the memory forming process, there is a three-stage model. We first record to be remembered information as a fleeting sensory memory. Sensory memory is the immediate, very brief recording of sensory information in the memory system. So again, that three-stage model, the first one is sensory memory. And sensory memory is the immediate, very brief recording of sensory information in the memory system, okay? Then after sensory memory, from there, we process information into short-term memory, where we encode it through rehearsal. So after sensory memory, it then goes over to our short-term memory. And short-term memory is activated memory that holds a few items briefly, such as digits of a phone number while calling, before the information is stored in the long-term memory or it's forgotten altogether. Now, you need to know this because it's on my quizzes, okay? So in short-term memory, it says activated memory that holds a few items briefly. You need to know that it holds 5 to 7 items. So when it says a few items, please write down in your notes right now 5 to 7 items. You'll see that on my quizzes, okay? And it also says briefly, it holds it briefly. Well, in some of the research, you'll see briefly means 15 to 20 seconds. And in some other research, you'll see briefly means 20 to 25 seconds. So I usually just tell my students, remember, for short-term memory, few information just means 5 to 7 items. Anything less than 25 seconds is what I usually tell my students. Because again, in different textbooks, different research, it says things a little bit differently, but usually it's 5 to 7 items, anything less than 25 seconds. Okay, that would be short-term memory. So again, it starts off with sensory memory, then it goes to short-term memory, and finally information moves into long-term memory for later retrieval. And long-term memory is the relatively permanent and limitless storehouse of the memory system. It includes knowledge, skills, and experiences. Long-term memory is the relatively permanent and limitless storage house for the memory system. So remember that, okay? And again, I tell my students, we just spoke about short-term memory is 5 to 7 items under 25 seconds. So just remember, with long-term memory, it's usually anything over 30 seconds, I tell them, throughout a lifetime. Okay, so as far as a time span, anything over 30 seconds throughout a lifespan. But what you have to remember is that it's a limitless storehouse. So it's, a limitless storehouse. So it's 5 to 7 for short-term memory. There's no limitation for long-term memory. Okay. All right. So again, the 3-stage model starts off with sensory memory, then goes to short-term memory, then goes to long-term memory. Now, there's another memory that you need to know the definition of, okay, which is called working memory. Now, a newer understanding of short-term memory that adds conscious, active processing of incoming auditory and visual information and of information retrieved from long-term memory. So for working memory, know the definition. It is a newer understanding of short-term memory that adds conscious, active processing of incoming auditory or visual information and of information retrieved from long-term memory. Okay? So let's see, to focus on the active processing that takes place in the middle stage, psychologists use the term working memory. And right now you are using your working memory to link the information you're reading or you're listening to with your previously stored information. And don't forget, I told you that I've got a learning video with great illustration in the link below. So click on that and you'll see more information about memory in general. Okay? All right, so now let's move on to how we encode memories. So we spoke of Atkinson's model earlier and how we process information and how we process memories. There are different types of memories, and we're going to go over explicit memory first. Explicit memory is retention of facts and experiences that one can consciously know about and declare. So it's also called declarative memory. Okay? So explicit memory is also called declarative memory, and it is retention of facts and experiences that one can consciously know and declare. So in Atkinson's model, it focused on how we process our explicit memories, the facts and experiences that we can consciously know and declare. So it's also called what type of memory? Declarative memory. We encode explicit memories through conscious, effortful processing. Ooh, that's a new word. Effortful processing is encoding that requires attention and conscious effort. Remember, we spoke about in a previous episode what consciousness versus unconscious means. So consciousness just means that you are aware that you are doing something. And the unconscious means that you're not aware, okay? So when we say effortful processing is encoding that requires attention and conscious effort, it means that you have to pay attention and you are aware of what's going on. So with explicit memory, retention of facts and experiences that one can consciously know, you are aware of it, okay, through effortful processing, which is encoding that requires attention and conscious effort, okay? But our mind has a second unconscious track. So you have a conscious track, but you also have an unconscious track. So behind the scenes, other information skips the conscious encoding track and goes on to an unconscious, which is called automatic processing. So automatic processing is unconscious encoding of incidental information, such as space, time, and frequency, and of well-learned information, such as word meanings. So automatic processing is unconscious, right? Explicit memory and effortful processing is conscious. You are aware. But with automatic processing, it is unconscious encoding of incidental information, such as space, time, and frequency, and of well-learned information, such as word meanings. Now let's go over what implicit memory is. Explicit versus implicit. Explicit was what? Retention of facts and experiences that one can consciously know and declare. Implicit memory is retention of learned skills or classically conditioned associations independent of conscious recollection, also called non-declarative memory. Implicit memory is retention of learned skills or classically conditioned associations, independent of conscious recollection. So again, behind the scenes, there are other information that skips the conscious encoding track, okay? This automatic processing, which happens without our awareness, produces implicit memories, also called non-declarative memories. Implicit memory is retention of learned skills or classically conditioned associations independent of conscious recollection. Our two-track mind then helps us encode, retain, and recall information through both effortful and automatic tracks. Effortful means what? Conscious. Encoding that requires attention and conscious effort. So it requires effort and automatic tracks. And automatic processing is what? Unconscious encoding. Okay? All right, let's move on. We have iconic memory versus encoding memory. All right, so iconic memory, I-C-O-N-I-C memory, a momentary sensory memory of visual stimuli, a photographic or picture image memory lasting no more than a few tenths of a second. So Iconic memory is a momentary sensory memory of visual stimuli. A photographic or picture image memory lasting no more than a few tenths of a second. So in Sterling's experiment, it demonstrated iconic memory. And what is that? A fleeting sensory memory of visual stimuli. For a few tenths of a second, our eyes register a photographic or picture image memory of a scene. That is what iconic memory is, right? It's visual, right? Now, echoic memory is a momentary sensory memory of auditory stimuli. If attention is elsewhere, sounds and words can still be recalled within 3 or 4 seconds. Now, echoic, so the iconic, remember that iconic is visual. You could see it with your eyes. That's just an easy way to remember. Iconic, I-C-O-N-I-C, iconic memory is visual, and echo, E-C-H-O-I-C, right? Memory is auditory. You hear it. Okay? So that's the difference between iconic memory and echoic memory. Now, let's talk about effortful processing strategies. Several effortful processing strategies can boost our ability to form new memories. Later, when we try to retrieve a memory, these strategies can make the difference between success and failure. All right, so let's talk about chunking first, okay? Chunking is organizing systems into familiar, manageable units. Often occurs automatically. Chunking is organizing items into familiar, manageable units. Often occurs automatically. So let's see. Glance for a few seconds at the first set of letters. Now look anywhere in a textbook or as you're taking notes for this episode, just glance for a few seconds, okay? Then look away and try to reproduce what you saw. So glance for a few seconds, look away and try to remember what you saw. Is it impossible or is it possible? Well, it all depends on if you're familiar with the information, right? But chunking information, basically organizing items into familiar, manageable units. It enables us to recall it more easily. Okay? Another example is try remembering 43 individual numbers and letters. It would be impossible unless chunked into, say, 7 meaningful chunks, such as, trying to remember 43 individual numbers and letters. Back in the day, and I say back in the day a lot, for example, credit cards, okay? It used to be just one long, 16 or 18 digit number, okay? No one can remember that. Imagine 16 or 18 numbers just chunked just one long number. No one can remember that, right? But then they started chunking the numbers on the credit cards. So there would be 4 numbers at a time. And that's just much easier to remember. Or even when you're looking at the credit card and you're buying something offline or whatever. It's just easier to remember, okay, I typed in the first set of 4. Now let me move on to the next set of 4. It's just easier for your eyes to actually gravitate to the next set of numbers on the credit card. Okay, so the information was organized into familiar, manageable units. So that long credit card number was organized into manageable units, and that's called chunking. Okay, now mnemonics is memory aids, especially those techniques that use vivid imagery and organizational devices. Mnemonics basically try to help encode lengthy passages and speeches. I mean, think about it. Many of these memory aids use vivid imagery. And what's a vivid imagery? Bright, colorful type of images or text. And why do they do that? They do that because we are particularly good at remembering mental pictures. We more easily remember concrete visual aids, visual words than we do abstract words. Okay, so we use mnemonics to help us remember things more easily. Again, mnemonics basically is memory aids. They're memory aids, especially those techniques that use vivid imagery and organizational devices. All right. Okay, let's move on to the spacing effect. Spacing effect is the tendency for distributed study or practice to yield better long-term retention than is achieved through massed studying or practice. Now, this is important when you're trying to, of course, ace your exams. Not only your psychology exams, which you will do because you're listening to these psychology exam study buddy episodes. So you're going to ace your psychology exam. But really, this is for any exam, okay? You don't want to cram all that information on the exam the night before, all right? You might get an A by doing that. But by the next day, you're going to forget all that information because it would not have, transferred into your long-term memory to stay there. All right. So you want to use what's called the spacing effect. We retain information better when our encoding is distributed over time, not just cramming the night before. You want to start studying 2-3 weeks ahead of time, okay? Experiments have consistently revealed the benefits of this spacing effect. Massed practice, which just means cramming. So massed practice, which means cramming, can produce speedy short-term learning and a feeling of confidence. But to paraphrase early memory researcher Herman, those who learn quickly also forget quickly. So distributed practice produces better long-term recall. After you've studied long enough to master the material, further study at that time becomes insufficient. Better to spend that extra reviewing time later. A day later if you need to remember something 10 days hence, or a month later if you need to remember something 6 months from now. So the spacing effect is one of psychology's most reliable findings, and it extends to motor skills and online game performance also. So remember, spacing effect is the tendency for distributed study or practice to yield better long-term retention than is achieved through mass study or practice. So it's better to space out your studying if you want to retain that information in your long-term memory. One effective way to distribute practice is repeated self-testing. And also, like you're doing here, you're listening to these study buddy episodes over and over and over. So you're more likely to retain the information you're learning into your long-term memory, okay, because you are rehearsing this information. You are repeating it over and over in your mind. So one effective way to distribute practice is repeated self-testing, a phenomena that researchers have called the testing effect. Testing effect is basically enhanced memory after retrieving rather than simply rereading information. Also sometimes referred to as a retrieval practice effect or test enhanced learning. So testing effect is enhanced memory after retrieving rather than simply rereading information. So testing effect, testing does more than access learning and memory. It improves them. That's why you have to, reread or re-listen to information over and over and over, okay? If you want it to transfer into your long-term memory. Now, shallow processing is encoding on a basic level based on the structure or appearance of words. So you have two different levels of processing. You have your shallow processing and your deep processing, okay? So memory researchers have discovered that we process verbal information at different levels. And that that depth of processing affects our long-term retention. Shallow processing encodes on an elementary level, such as a word's letter, or at a more intermediate level, a word's sound. Shallow processing encodes on a basic level based on the structure or appearance of words. Thus, we may type there when we mean there. So we may type THERE, but we really meant THEIR, okay? Or we may type WRITE, right, when we mean RIGHT. And also we may type TWO when we mean TOO. Shallow processing is encoded on a basic level based on the structure or appearance of words. Now, deep processing is basically encoded systematically. So deep processing is encoded systematically based on the meaning of the word, okay? It tends to yield the best retention. So deep processing encodes systematically based on the meaning of the words. The deeper or more meaningful the processing, the better our retention. Okay? So these two levels of processing, shallow processing and deep processing. Shallow processing processes how? It encodes on a basic level. And deep processing does what? encoding systematically based on the meaning of the word. Okay, we are doing great. We are doing great. I know this is a lot of information, but again, you have to know these different terms to understand fully the different types of memory storage and retrieval, okay? So now let's move on to storing and retrieving memories. And the first words that I want to go over is semantic memory versus episodic memory, all right? So semantic memory is basically explicit memory of facts and general knowledge. One of our two conscious memory systems. The other is episodic memory. So with semantic memory, remember that memory is explicit. Do you remember what explicit memory is? We went over that a few minutes ago. Do you remember? Yes, you do. Tell me, what is explicit memory? You are right. Explicit memory is the retention of facts and experiences that one can consciously know and declare. So semantic memory, because we're talking about storage and retrieving memories right now, so storing information. Semantic memory is explicit memory of facts and general knowledge, one of our two conscious memory systems. Excellent. Now, episodic memory. What is that? Well, explicit memory of personally experienced events. It's one of our two conscious memory systems, and we all know the other is semantic. So our memory systems are what? Semantic memory and episodic memory. And they are both what type of memory? Is it implicit or explicit? They're both explicit memory. Okay, so we talked about explicit and implicit memory first. We did that a few minutes ago. Explicit memory is retention of facts and experiences that one can consciously know. Implicit memory is retention of learned skills or classically conditioned association. Right? So explicit and implicit. Underneath explicit, you have two different types. You have semantic and episodic. Semantic is basically the type of memory in which facts and general knowledge is learned. Semantic memory is explicit memory of facts and general knowledge. And episodic memory is explicit memory of personally experienced events. So with semantic memory, remember, something you've learned, like in school, like you're learning all these different terms. That falls under semantic memory. And with episodic memory, it's personally experienced events. Okay? Excellent. I feel like we're doing so good. Okay, so another type of memory, which is always on psych exams, is called flashbulb memory. All right? Flashbulb memory is a clear memory of an emotionally significant moment or event. So, emotion-triggered hormonal changes help explain why we remember exciting or shocking events, such as our first kiss or whereabouts when learning of a loved one's death. So, do you remember your first kiss, where it was, who it was with? Yes, of course you do. That's an example of flashbulb memory. Or even the death of a loved one. You remember exactly where you were, what you were doing. Flashbulb memories is a clear memory of emotional, significant moment or event. Now, this perceived clarity of memories of surprising, significant events leads some psychologists to call them flashbulb memories. Our flashbulb memories are noteworthy for their vividness and our confidence in them. But as we relive, rehearse, and discuss them, even these memories may come to error. With time, some errors creep into people's recollections of their earlier memories. So remember that. So mostly, however, people's memories remain consistent over the next 2 or 3 years. But even after a while, our flashbulb memory, which is a clear memory of an emotional, significant moment or event, with time, some errors do creep in, to people's recollections. Okay, let's move on to memory retrieval. After the magic of brain encoding and storage, we still have the daunting task of retrieving the information, right? So what triggers retrieval? Let's go over that now. Priming is a great example. That's definitely a word for you to know. Often our associations are activated without our awareness. Philosopher slash psychologist William James referenced to this process, which we call priming, as the wakening of associations, okay? Priming is the activation, often unconsciously, of particular associations in memory. So on a quiz, if you see the word unconscious versus conscious in regards to this definition, be careful with it. Hint, hint, I do have this on my quiz. And if it says for priming, it is conscious, it's wrong, it's false. Priming is the activation, often unconscious, of particular association in memory. Okay? All right. So let's move on to mood congruent memory. It is the tendency to recall experiences that are consistent with one's current mood, whether it's good or bad. Now, this is something that you need to know, okay? First of all, there's something that's called state-dependent memory, okay? State-dependent memory is closely related to context-dependent memory, all right? What we learn in one state, be it drunk or sober, may be more easily recalled when we are again in the same state, all right? Whether we're drunk or sober. Hopefully we're sober, right? What people learn, they always use this example in psych books or when trying to explain what state-dependent memory is. We'll get back to mood in a minute, but they always use, examples of being sober or drunk in textbooks. So that's why I'm talking about it. So what people learn when drunk, they don't recall well in any state For example, alcohol disputes memory storage. We know that. If you're having a dispute while, drunk from alcohol, you probably won't remember exactly what happened in another state of being, okay? But they recall it slightly better when drunk again. Someone who hides money when drunk may forget the location until drunk again. So that's state-dependent memory. And then back to moods now, okay? So moods also provide an example of memory state dependence. Emotions that accompany good or bad events become retrieval cues. All right. Thus, our memories are somewhat mood congruent. And mood congruent memory is the tendency to recall experiences that are consistent with one's current mood, whether it's good or bad. Okay, so we've talked a lot about memory in regards to encoding, storing, and retrieving. But there's a whole section too on forgetting. Yeah, there's forgetting, memory construction, and how to improve memory. I want to focus more on how to improve your memory. But before that, let's just go through a few definitions, okay? So again, amid all the applause, for memory, all the efforts to understand it, most of the books talk about how to improve it and not really about forgetting, So for some people, memory loss is severe and permanent. So for some people, they pretty much forget pretty quickly. That information does not, transfer into their long-term memory at all, okay? And there's some definitions in regards to different types of amnesia and stuff like that. I'm not gonna, go over these definitions too much in depth because we're focusing on, mostly in this episode on encoding and storage and retrieval. Okay, but there are, like for example, retrograde amnesia, which is an inability to retrieve information from one's past. So there's different types of amnesia and, failure to receive or retrieve information with different types of interferences that go on in memory, okay? Like for example, repression, in psychoanalytic theory or perspective, which is Freud's theory. He talks about repression being the basic defense mechanism that banishes from consciousness anxiety arousing thoughts, feelings, and memories. Okay, so there are different types of motivated forgetting, for example, and even Freud talked about repression, one of his defense mechanisms. Okay, so again, misinformation effect. I want you to know that definition, okay? Misinformation effect occurs when misleading information has corrupted one's memory of an event. That's a definition you need to know. You'll see it on most psych exams in regards to memory. Misinformation effect occurs when misleading information has corrupted one's memory of an effect. The repeated result is a misinformation effect. When exposed to misleading information, we tend to misremember. We tend to misremember. Misinformation effect occurs when misleading information has corrupted one's memory of an event. So powerful is the misleading effect that it can influence later attitudes and behaviors. One experiment falsely suggested to some Dutch university students that is, as children, they became ill after eating spoiled egg salad sandwiches, both immediately and 4 months later. So there was an experiment that was done to university students, and they were told that as children, they became very sick after eating an egg sandwich, an egg salad. And the egg salad was spoiled, so they got very sick. Now, just by giving them that misinformation, after absorbing that suggestion, that information, they were less likely to eat egg salad sandwiches. So just for that information that they got sick, that misinformation, because it never really happened, those students were less likely to eat anything with egg salad again, right? All right, so misinformation effect occurs when misleading information has corrupted one's memory of an event. Okay, I want to move on to ways to improve memory. Now, in all my Intro to Psych courses, if you're getting quizzed on memory, I always have a short essay in regards to improving study habits and memory and transferring information into your long-term memory. So there's always a short essay, right? This is a great area to assist you with that short essay. So how can you use memory research findings to do better in this course and in all your other courses? So this is not just, me suggesting what to do. This is actual research that was done on memory, okay? So biology's findings benefit medicine. In other words, this information from different research will help you to retrieve, and review study techniques based on actual research. So incorporate these strategies to help you ace your exams in all your classes, okay? The first being rehearse repeatedly. To master material, remember the spacing effect that we spoke of earlier, and use distributed spaced practice. To learn a concept, give yourself many separate study sessions. Take advantage of life's little intervals. In other words, take little mini breaks. Don't just sit there for hours and hours and hours trying to cram. You have to take little breaks, whether you get up, you go, you eat an apple, you walk, for 2 minutes, you go to the bathroom, you do these things, you take mini breaks, but you need to rehearse repeatedly, okay? As the testing effect has shown, it pays to study actively. Taking lecture notes by hand, which requires summarizing material into your own words, for example, is really good. It leads to better retention and does verbatim laptop note taking. So actually writing it down with your hands first is better than just typing it up on your laptop. All right. Let's see. Make the material meaningful. That's the next thing you have to do. You can build a network of retrieval cues by taking your notes in your own words and then increase these cues by forming as many associations as possible. Apply the concepts to your own life. Form images. Understand and organize the information. And relate the material the material that you've learned, you got to relate it, to relate the material to what you already know or have experienced. So you have to make the material meaningful, okay? Next, you have to activate retrieval cues. Remember the importance of context-dependent and state-dependent memory. Mentally recreate the situation and the mood in which your original learning occurred. Jog your memory by allowing one thought to cue the next. So activate retrieval cues. Next, use mnemonic devices. Make up a story that incorporates vivid images of the items. Use mnemonic devices. You want to chunk information, okay? You want to create rhythms and rhymes, such as I before E except after C. You want to do that, okay? Next, you want to minimize proactive and retroactive interference. Study before sleep. Do not schedule back-to-back study times for topics that are likely to interfere with each other, such as, studying Spanish and then studying French back-to-back of each other. You just don't want to do that. So you want to minimize proactive and retroactive interference. Sleep more is the next thing. Yes, I said sleep more. During sleep, the brain reorganizes and consolidates information for long-term memory. So you definitely want to get good sleep. You don't want to sleep for 2-3 hours and then, that's it per night. Sleep deprivation disrupts this process, Even 10 minutes of waking rest enhances memory of what we have read. So after a period of hard study, you might just want to sit down or lie down for a few minutes before tackling the next subject. Sleep does help. Next, you want to test your own knowledge, both to rehearse it and to find out what you don't know yet. The testing effect is real and it is powerful. This is why I decided to, record the psychology exam study buddy episodes, because I said to myself, I do a lot of video learning lectures, which is great. I call them Learn Psychology While You Sleep, which is great. But how can I further, help my students to retain the information that they've learned into their long-term memory? It's great to get a short learning video lecture, whether it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes on a particular subject matter, and be able to watch it or listen to it. But I go through the information only once on the learning video lectures, because you're looking at it and I want you to pause and I want you to take notes. But in these psychology exam study buddy episodes, I go over things over and over and over because I want you to rehearse the information in your mind. The tested effect is real and it is very powerful. Don't be lured into overconfidence by your ability to recognize information. You have to test your recall, over and over, and practice items, okay? And define the terms and concepts listed, and go back and learn the definitions. That's why I repeat definitions in this study buddy episodes. over and over and over, because I'm helping you to store that information in your long-term memory. And you are to go over these Study Buddy episodes over and over and over. Especially, I want you to listen to these episodes before you go to bed and as you drift off to sleep, right? So put your headphones on at night as you're relaxing and going to bed. And listen to the information and repeat in your mind. Rehearse the informational content as you drift off to sleep. Hence, learn psychology while you sleep. All right, so this does it for this episode of Psychology Exam Study Buddy with me, your Psych Exam Study Buddy, Dr. Bev Knox. This ends this episode all about memory, encoding memory, storing memory, retrieving memory, and improving memory. So this is episode 16, study and encoding, storage and retrieval, and also how to improve your memory. Now in episode 17, our next episode, I'm going to actually go over questions and answers from actual psychology exams. So again, you are welcome. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next episode.